It is 11:30. You know what that means. It's time to talk all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Rupert Raj. The avalanche of news just keeps on coming. And let's face it, the stuff you see on social media isn't always legit. But what you see here is, because we check, double check, and triple check. So let's get right to it. The race for Detroit mayor getting more crowded by the day. And a familiar face in the race is in Studio C tonight. You know, former Detroit Police Chief James Craig, his message for voters and goals for the city and what he says sets him apart from his competitors. And speaking of elections, a former gubernatorial candidate has her eyes set on two races. Which offices Tudor Dixon could run for? That's coming up in about 20 minutes. But we begin tonight with a major day in the 3-plus-year war in Ukraine, sparked by Russia's invasion back in 2022. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin had a phone call earlier today where they agreed to pause strikes against energy infrastructure right away. But Putin stopped short of agreeing to a 30-day pause in fighting and also doubled down on his demand for Ukraine to stop getting foreign military and intelligence aid. And there's no sign he's backing down from his conditions for that peace deal that Ukraine vehemently opposes. Still, though, the White House said it's the first step in peace talks, and President Trump had this to say tonight.
Now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen. And I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things.
Pretty interesting phone call. Would want to be a fly on the wall in either office there. Shortly after that phone call, there were air raid sirens blaring in Kyiv and explosions in the city. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says they're open to proposals that lead to sustainable peace, but said any talks need to be transparent. Let's bring it back here at home. The battle over President Trump's deportation plans leading to a rare statement from the Supreme Court's Chief Justice. President Trump demanded a judge who blocked deportation flights using the 1798 Alien Enemies Act be removed from the bench. The Trump administration used it to deport hundreds of migrants over the weekend, even as the judge blocked them from using it and ordered the planes be turned around. But Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, that's the person we're talking about here, rejected those impeachment calls and released this statement instead, saying, quote, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that very purpose. Chief Justice John Roberts releasing that statement just hours ago. But in that same Fox News interview you saw a minute ago with President Trump, he said this.
He didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name, but many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge. I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left. He was Obama appointed. And he actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination.
Well, the judge that President Trump is talking about there is actually a federal judge. And while he was appointed to his federal bench by President Obama, it was actually George W. Bush who nominated him to his first judicial position on the D.C. Superior Court. So he's had bipartisan support in the past from both Bush and Obama. And here's the thing to keep in mind. Impeachment is a step that's usually only taken in serious ethical or criminal misconduct. But by the way, in the history of America, most impeachment attempts have been against judges, not presidents. No shortage of political news, kind of like drinking from a fire hose. That's a lot to take in. So let's run through some of the big stories of the day that you need to know about. We're going to begin with another courtroom where a judge ruled the Department of Government Efficiency dismantling the U.S. Agency for International Development likely violated the Constitution. That ruling indefinitely blocks DOJ from making more cuts. It also requires the Trump administration to give all USAID employees access to their email and computers again. but it appears to stop short of reversing the firings. The judge also acknowledged that the agency has effectively been eliminated. To the Environmental Protection Agency now, where plans to eliminate its scientific research office could fire more than 1,000 scientists and employees. That office helps give the Scientific Foundation for rules protecting human health, ecosystems, and other systems from environmental pollutants. Now, the EPA administrator has said he wants to eliminate 65% of the agency's budget altogether. The remaining staff, those who are left, would be reassigned to other parts of the agency, and a memo says that would give increased oversight and align with administration priorities. Finally, President Trump ended Secret Service protections for former President Biden's 2 adult children. Trump claims Hunter Biden had 18 agents assigned to his detail while he was in South Africa, and Ashley Biden said she had 13 assigned to her. Those moves are effective right away. The former president's office has not reacted just yet. Now to a story that had people talking for decades, the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. Americans now waiting for the remaining files related to his 1963 killing to be released, which President Trump says won't be redacted. They won't block out anything. 80,000 files will be released. But it's not clear how much of those are part of the millions of pages that already the public has access to. Trump, the president, also promised to declassify records related to the assassination of Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, as well as MLK Jr. But many who've studied what's already been released say, hey, don't expect anything earth-shattering. It's a story that has so many of you talking. In fact, I asked you on social media if you thought the new files would reveal anything significant. Here's what some of you told me. Kimberly, thanks for writing in. Not really. Sometimes it's okay to let sleeping dogs lie. Suzanne says, no, I don't think so. Gail agrees, saying nope. Aaron Tobin, a regular on the Pulse, writing in, I'd like to know if any part of our own government had anything to do with it. He who does not learn from history is doomed to repeat it. Jason, just another shiny object to distract from something else. And Julie says, it certainly is not JFK's Democratic Party anymore. It's a story that has so many layers, a lot of history to it, and we're unpacking it right here on The Pulse. Metro Detroit's John F. Kennedy researcher, Jay Hernandez, is in the studio here tonight, and we thank him for joining, of course, us on The Pulse. Thanks for being with us here tonight.
Thanks, Root. It's my pleasure to be here.
So it's interesting because when you if you Google Jay Hernandez and put JFK next to it, you would actually find all these different places where you speak about this, from libraries or organizations. This is fascinating. What's your take on these files being released?
Well, the files, we've been waiting on this since 2017, actually. The files were supposed to be released, unredacted, by 2017. That was the JFK Records Act from 1992. Since then, they've been postponed per the presidents at the time to where we have approximately, there's 5 million JFK records that are at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland.
Right.
The amount of records that have not been released are about 5,000, which is, if you want to put it in real terms, it is one Staples box full of files. So
that's what's not been released. That's the stuff
what has not been released yet. There are some redactions that could happen, but it's pretty specific. I'm not holding my breath.
What do you think is in those pages that so many presidents, including Trump back in 2017, decided it wasn't a good idea to release? Anything that hurts national security? What could that be?
Yes. The bulk of it is CIA information regarding other countries. And first off, you have to realize that the National Archives themselves, who hold the files, they are not allowed to declassify files.
Right.
So before they can just say, we're releasing these files, they have to get okays from all those federal entities.
Got it.
CIA, Department of Defense, State Department, FBI, Secret Service.
But when you say other countries' involvement, and that would be why national security could be at risk, what is the allegation? What are the alleged things that these other countries could have been involved with the assassination attempt and the assassination itself?
Not involved with the assassination itself or the attempt. More of the fact that what the United States intelligence community was doing at that time, we were basically tapping all the phone lines in the embassies in Mexico. So we didn't want that to be known. And people may ask, you know, it's been 61 years since this has happened. Do we really still tap the phones in Mexico? Well, any of those files that occurred outside of the United States, like the Mexico files or some Russian files, the only way those can be released per CIA guidelines is with authorization from those countries.
So basically you're talking about now if you declassify that stuff, it gets released, and now you find out another country was involved with some of that work that you're saying could have happened. Now those countries are held to account for those allegations, right? And they have to answer, and that could hurt relations with the U.S. That's the problem.
A prime example is there was a document that was released in the prior Trump administration from the National Archives, and they released it redacted and then unredacted. And it's interesting to see that it's from redacted. You couldn't tell where it was from and what it really talked about. It talked about the CIA and having a station there. But when you saw it unredacted, it was from the country of Australia, and it said, please do not release any information regarding our CIA station in Canberra, Australia, because it will open a plethora of questions from our government and the public in Australia asking, how long has the CIA had a station in our country, and what are they doing in our country? Are they affecting Australian politics?
I find this fascinating because I think when you talk about, you know, the shroud of secrecy around the JFK assassination, we often think just about the assassination itself. We think about Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, who then shot Lee Harvey Oswald 2 days after this assassination, and we think maybe Jack Ruby knew something, or Lee Harvey Oswald knew something, and he was trying to silence him. That stuff is not what we're talking about here. Yes or no?
Not really, no. Not unless there's, and people are expecting a smoking gun, basically a file that they're going to come upon that will say, this is what happened. I don't think there's anything in there regarding Jack Ruby because pretty much we know everything about Jack Ruby and what happened that day. It was not a planned event. He was kind of lurking around. He liked the police. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time with a pistol in his pocket.
But right before Lee Harvey Oswald was going to speak for the first time publicly since the assassination. And that's why, of course, there's so many people who are conspiracy theorists. Do you think that this release will silence those conspiracies at all, or do you think this is kind of arbitrary? It really doesn't matter.
I think that they could release every file and there will still be accusations that they're keeping some files. The FBI found some files, about 2,500 files within the last month that have not been included. That's the question for me is how do you explain that?
You know, I find this fascinating because it was years ago. For our older audience over the age of 40, you'll remember when Geraldo Rivera was going to open up and unearth this thing on live TV, and it turned out to be nothing. It feels like it has those types of Geraldo-esque vibes with this one because 60,000 files, the president's like, hey, we're going to release it unredacted. Who knows what we'll find out? I know you'll be watching closely as they release it.
Yes,
thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Rue.
Thanks for joining us. Jay Hernandez, of course, a local researcher for JFK. We're turning to the race for Detroit mayor next on The Pulse. You know this man, former police chief James Craig. He's in our studio right now to talk about his message for voters. He wants to be the next mayor of the city of Detroit. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics from the D to D.C. Joining us now to talk about his run for mayor, former Detroit Police Chief James Craig. It is always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
Good seeing you, Ru.
It's good to have you on The Pulse, as we've had every candidate on so far who's thrown their hat in the ring. You're one that made a splash for a good reason, because people have seen this movie before in terms of your leadership. You've been the police chief for many, many years during a really tough time. But why did you decide now to run for mayor?
This is the right time. You know, I love the city of Detroit, and I know you've heard me say this before. When I look spanning my 44-year career in law enforcement, the last 8 years of it was in Detroit, Michigan, the best years. So I love the city of Detroit. I'm excited about the future of Detroit, but we must keep the trajectory going up, because the wrong candidate, we could go back. And so that's very important to me. And I know I've been tested. especially crisis management tested. I know how to do that job, and I will excel in this job as well.
I know you don't like this question, but I'm going to ask it to you because it's important to ask so people understand. You have run for office after, of course, your stint as a police chief. You ran for governor. You ran for Senate. You had some issues with signatures.
Does not count Senate, but we can talk about it.
But we can talk about the fact that you did put your hat in the ring, right? What did you learn from that that made you feel like you're more prepared today to run for office now?
Well, you're talking about a statewide office. You know, certainly I get asked a question about the signatures. How did you not know? I mean, as a police chief, certainly the chief executive of a police department, you're not going to know everything every minute of the day. But when you put the right team in place, that's what they're for, the executives, the command level officers, but also putting the necessary checks and balances in place. I understand that. I'm very adept at that. However, you know, the political game was new to me. I hired what I believed and was a competent consulting team, and they outsourced to some bad people to get signatures. Now, what's different, what I learned, I'm all over this signature. You know, I'm getting them myself. Not by myself, but very much hands-on. But we don't need as many signatures for mayor as we did with the governor. So that's very important to me. And so the key is, you know, nothing's perfect. If mistakes happen, you own them. You let the public know what you plan to do next. So that was my first road down the political highway.
You're a Republican. You've been a Republican basically all of your life.
No.
No? You changed? At one point you were a Democrat?
I was a Democrat for most of my life, but I was a conservative JFK Democrat. And that's what's missing sometimes in the conversation. Now, certainly I transitioned. I like to tell folks that as a conservative, as a Democrat, the Democrat Party left me. And so I transitioned. It didn't happen overnight. I transitioned as a Republican. Certainly as a police chief, it's an appointed position. Party doesn't matter. And
it didn't come up. And this job is supposed to be a nonpartisan job as mayor of the city of Detroit.
Absolutely it is.
However, we have, as now a Republican, someone who obviously you have to curry the favor of, and that's the President of the United States. As the only Republican who's running right now for this job, what do you think you can bring to the table in terms of a relationship with President Trump?
Well, clearly, that's a great question, Roop. I certainly can. I will have something that most major city mayors will not have. I'll have a direct line to the White House. And what does that translate into?
And you're confident that that line's still open?
I'm very confident. And in fact, this is about Detroit. It's not about me. Look, Mayor Duggan had a direct line to the White House with President Biden that worked well for Detroit. But we need to have that because we have got to continue to take this city upward. So this thing about being a Republican, Democrat, the issues are the issues. I've been a conservative. In fact, many Democrats in this city, growing up in this city, I was born in this city. My parents were JFK conservative Democrats. So nothing's changed. I am the same person. Now, of course, you know, when people say, well, we didn't know you were a Republican. Well, I'm on the cover of NRA magazine. I'm on National Fox talking about issues that maybe some Democrats wouldn't talk about. But again, this is a nonpartisan race. And the first thing is I'm supporting the Detroiters first.
I want to ask you the question about capability of doing the job. You've watched Mayor Duggan do the job. You were one of his employees. He made you the police chief.
And a deputy mayor.
And a deputy mayor. But you ran a police department. How does that make you qualified to run a city with more than 600,000 people in it?
So I'll tell you, having been a police chief in not one city but 3 cities, the police chief certainly has a high-level position in city government. It is generally the police chief that manages crisis. First responsibility of any president, mayor, governor, public safety. And people want to know that whoever's in that seat can handle it.
But there's also affordable housing. There's also
absolutely.
There's the economy. There's business. There's a lot of other things in play.
There are things, and just so your viewers know, I came in Detroit at a bad time. We were going through bankruptcy. In fact, I was talking to a businessman today from Cincinnati. He called me to congratulate me on my decision. He said, Chief, you may not remember, we told you to stay out of Detroit because we wanted you to stay here in Cincinnati and be our mayor. And I thought about it every bit of 30 seconds and said, well, I'm going home to Detroit. And that was what's most important. So clearly, when Cincinnati saw something in me that would want me to run that city, do you think the voters out there now go, we want Chief Craig? And I'm going to tell you something else, Roop, and I know we're running short, is that so many Detroiters, I don't know if they're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, they say, Chief, we want you back. We need you back.
It's going to be an interesting
and it happens
ride.
A lot.
A ride that started as you were a patrolman, a police officer here so many years ago.
Yes.
Went through the ranks, went all the way to L.A., Cincinnati, back home. Hometown guy, wants to be the mayor of the city of Detroit. Chief James Craig, it's good to see you. We appreciate your time here on The Pulse.
Can your viewers
Thanks
go
for joining us.
ChiefCraigforMayor.com. That's important.
You got the website all set up, ready to go.
Set up.
Tested and ready to go.
Yeah.
We thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now that we've talked about 2025, let's talk about the midterms, because former gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon says she's thinking about running for something. The offices she's considering. Next. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show, The Pulse. We've got a big race for mayor this year. We just talked about that. We just got out of a hectic 2024 election, and already there are many ready to talk midterms. One candidate you'll remember from 2022 who says she is considering a run for something. We're talking about former Republican candidate for governor, Tudor Dixon. She lost to Governor Whitmer 2 years ago, but today says she's looking at either making another run for that office or that Senate seat. This after Senator Gary Peters announced he won't seek another term. In a statement posted on X, Dixon called Whitmer's term a lost decade and went on to say this: together we can chart a path that grows jobs and drives down costs, brings manufacturing home, gives taxpayers their money back, makes our government transparent, and sets our kids up for bright futures. Tudor Dixon, a familiar name to so many of you. Dixon didn't say when she would announce her decision, only saying it's coming soon. I reached out to her team just a few hours ago saying when it happens, have her come on The Pulse. The sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum could impact something you probably didn't think about, but maybe you did: beer. Think about it. 64% of all brews are sold in aluminum cans. So the cost of a six-pack could actually spike. In fact, one political pollster, Steve Mitchell, says the average cost would go up about 4.5%.
Taking that price from $8 to $8.72. But the bottom line is that it only increases the cost of one can of beer by about a dime. And I don't think that people who are supportive of Donald Trump are going to move their support away just because it costs them a dime more.
Or if you're a supporter of drinking beer, maybe the dime, you'll just eat up the cost. Fun fact, Mitchell actually ran a bar before becoming a pollster. He said drinkers would only react when the cost actually went up, and the complaining only lasted a couple of days. Well, speaking of tariffs, the White House is not only doubling down on them tonight, but they also have a growing list of countries that'll face reciprocal tariffs April 2nd. You heard that word a lot. President Trump said there won't be any exemptions to those steel and aluminum tariffs. His administration says they're necessary. But Democrats and some business owners say the uncertainty is harmful, and an economist says it's too early to tell if the tariffs will trigger a recession. Drug makers are pushing the president to exclude medical supplies from tariffs as well, saying that could actually put lives at risk. That is The Pulse for tonight. Remember to send us your political questions. For any fact-checking you want us to do, email thepulse@fox.com, or you can scan the QR code to auto-launch your email on your phone. I'm Roop Raj. As usual, we'll see you tomorrow night. Have a good night, everybody.